Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Black and White Theology Podcast.
Hello.
Coming to you live from Faith Church in Sellersville. Well, it's the Faith Church building of Sellersville, the Church of the People.
You know, I was just thinking, we should shoot this one time from Allentown.
I would be more than happy to. Do you have...
As soon as we get a place.
I was just about to ask. You got a place to do it? You got some equipment?
We could set up on the corner of Fifth and Allen.
The street.
That would be awesome with the people walking by when it gets warm. We'd be like, wait, here's somebody right here. Hey, come here.
You gotta...
So have a seat. What do you think? That would be awesome, man. I'm serious. Let's do an outdoor podcast.
You'd have to grab an internet signal from somewhere.
No, we could do it right outside the community center.
Can you run an internet cable from the community center?
Absolutely.
Okay, all right.
That would be awesome, right on the sidewalk.
All right, we'll let you figure it out, because otherwise we'd have to record it and then upload it later.
Can you imagine in an urban context, white and a black dude sitting on a corner at a little table talking with microphones? That's going to draw a crowd.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's good. No, I'm serious. That would be awesome.
Okay, I'll let you set it up.
No, I will.
Just let me know. But it's got to be at least 75 degrees.
Yeah, no. I'm talking like May, June.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. And just set it up there, and I'll ask the guy. I'm sure he'll let us run an Ethernet cord, plug into the internet.
Okay.
That would be neat, man. I'm just thinking, because people are all over the place.
Yeah.
And we could just grab. We'll probably get a little audience that'll just sit around and listen.
Okay.
And then we can engage them. Be like, hey, what do you think about that, man?
You know? Do it live on location. That's what they call that, right?
On location.
Yeah, on location from the streets of Allentown,
That'd be
Pennsylvania.
Awesome. I like that. Yeah, I will hook that up.
Okay.
Stay tuned for that.
This is episode 24.
Yes, one more. Are the mugs? Are the mugs here, John? Did you order the mugs? I hope so. We said the 25th. He promised back on episode 3. Go check it.
Yeah.
That at the 25th, if we made 25, he would get mugs. So are they ordered? That's all I need to know.
We got something.
Oh, here we go. We got something. I don't want no cheesy plastic cup with a B and a W on it that your daughter painted on it. I mean, I know she does artwork, but we let's get it printed up nice, okay? A real ceramic mug. Thank you. All right. You promised, man.
Did I promise?
Yeah, go. Episode 3, right about time mark 5:13.
All right, excellent.
Go listen.
Okay, so Ron was supposed to bring the.
Oh my goodness! Oh wow!
The topic today.
That is not true. Go listen to last week's topic. We were supposed to continue something.
I thought school went virtual today. I thought you had 7 hours in your office just to work.
I was praying and fasting.
Is that what you were doing with the Dr. Pepper there?
Well,
it is diet. So.
I'm breaking the fast.
Okay, all right. I got you.
It's our unsponsored sponsor.
Yeah,
that's right. Our unsponsored sponsor.
It's the sweet one.
Yes,
right.
Established 1885. Wow, that's an old company.
Yeah. It's
I
probably
get some reparations off of that.
Yeah.
Who started Dr. Pepper?
I don't even know.
Great granddad.
Well, so this week, based of our conversation of cancel culture last week, happy birthday, Dr. Seuss, who's kind of been canceled. Did you hear about Dr. Seuss?
I didn't follow that story.
Are you serious?
Dr. Seuss been canceled?
They can't. Well, they didn't cancel.
Dr. Seuss, isn't he passed away?
Yeah, he's dead.
He's passed.
But
so
his books are still making a lot of money.
So they're canceling his books, you mean?
Not all of them. Four of them.
Like Green Eggs, Ham, and all that kind of stuff?
The one about Mulberry Street, that's one. One about a zoo.
I can't remember.
I'm not a real Dr. Seuss
I'm not either.
scholar, but
we didn't read that in the inner city.
But we
had different books.
Due to racial overtones in Dr. Seuss, they have canceled 4 of his books. Will no longer. And this is actually the company that makes money off of his books. Off of his books have themselves said we're pulling these books out of publication and choosing to, I assume, take up a loss because they won't be selling those anymore.
Okay. Because of racial overtones.
I think so, yeah. I'm not sure if that's the exact word they use, but that's my understanding. And really it was more the illustrations in these books.
Yeah.
So I know one shows a picture of a Chinaman who eats with sticks, and it's your typical Oriental kind of garb with a guy with chopsticks in a bowl,
What's wrong with that?
You tell me.
I mean, I was in China 2 times, and
they dressed a certain way and ate with sticks.
We eat with chopsticks.
Yeah.
I was the one out of place because I didn't know how to use them.
I would have loved to have seen that.
Right? I was like, y'all got a fork for the brother.
Did you learn?
I did. By the time I left, I got pretty good with it. But anyway,
it's like when you go to a Chinese restaurant like P.F. Chang's, an official, authentic Chinese restaurant like P.F. Chang's, the chain. They give you chopsticks, and so you try and look cool by pretending like. And I tried that for about 5 seconds, and they said, "Give me a fork." But the Chinaman I think was an issue. So it's a great question. How is that racist?
Right.
Because every culture has a particular
identity
and a particular way that they dress or dressed in the past.
Now, if you're making fun of the Chinese people, that's something different. But if you're and again, I don't know the story, so I'm just talking in a general sense here. If you're writing a story and it's referring to China or that culture, and you have a picture of a Chinese man dressed that way, which is a cultural way that they dress, I don't see. I don't know. I don't get that.
So let me on that note. This is off topic, but this is an interesting conversation in continuation, kind of our conversation last week. This was a few years ago. There was a seminary. I won't name the seminary, but the professors who were all white put out a video where they dressed up like hip hop artists.
Okay.
And it was and they wrote a rap.
Okay.
And they did a parody of something in theology or textual criticism or something. I don't remember the content of the video. It's since been pulled. But so you have these old white professors, and Paul Peralt's calling me right now. So obviously he's not watching the Black and White Theology podcast. So
maybe he has a comment. And shall we take our next caller, please? Paul Perot's on the line.
Yeah, maybe. Oh, maybe he's calling.
He might have a comment.
Yeah, he's calling the call line, which we haven't given out the number for that.
I know
yet,
he's a big Dr. Seuss fan.
Yeah.
I don't know that. I don't know.
You were just talking to him right before you came up here.
Yeah, well, we were talking about.
But anyway, it was a bunch of old white guys that dressed up with like chains and like baggy jeans and stuff like that. Okay. They wrote a rap and did this rap, and and later came out and apologized for it because of it being insensitive toward a particular racial identity. Obviously, black hip hop artists. So curious to see, and this hit me back then. Okay, so they came out and they put out this apology. This is a good conservative theological seminary. They put out this big long apology, saying, "Hey, we're sorry. We didn't realize, that we were propagating certain racial stereotypes, and within that we realized we offended people." And so they backed off. They apologized. They pulled the video and said, "We're not going to do anything like that again."
Paul is locked out of the building.
Oh, is he?
That's why I was calling.
Is that why he was calling? Because you locked out of the building.
So,
okay.
He doesn't have his keys.
No, I got you on the main camera. So
okay.
I'll go do that.
All right. So John, our producer, is going to go let Paul in as we continue.
Yeah. Doesn't Paul oversee the facilities around here? Can't he control the door locks with his phone?
Wow. Anyway, he got to upgrade. That's so funny.
So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on, so white people mimicking aspects of black culture as like a parody type thing, which is what the seminary did.
Yeah. So what was the point of what they were doing? What was the context of this? Why were they doing this?
They wrote a rap to. I don't know the context of. They wrote a rap.
Was it a talent show? Was it?
No, I don't know. I think they were just trying to be creative and fun and have fun, and they put this out there as.
See, I think here and again, I don't know the context of what, but I think we got to make a difference between somebody doing something that is offensive to another culture versus, I'm doing something and was offensive to another culture versus I'm doing this because I want to offend another culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm belittling, I'm making fun.
And I think those lines, I think, keep getting blurred.
Okay.
So I don't know these professors. I don't even know the seminary you're talking about. So I don't know the heartbeat. I don't know if that was their intent. But the point is,
I'm pretty confident it wasn't their intent to make fun of hip hop artists.
Okay, so for whatever reason,
I think the humor was in a bunch of old white guys doing a rap,
trying to be hip hop. Okay,
yeah,
right. So if that's their intent, but then obviously they must have gotten feedback where they put the apology and pulled the video. Then I think it's right to say no, that's not what I was trying to do, and we apologize for that, right?
Is it right? I guess my question is, because I honestly don't know, is it right to be offended by that? Like where does the offense of that come from? Because within like comedy, for instance, and comedy is kind of one of those things where a lot of comedians are coming under fire.
And that's right where I was going to come. See, okay, I think
because
comedy becomes like a context, right?
Right. So you hear a lot of black comedians, in a sense, making fun of white culture and white people and what white people do. And we sit and we laugh. We say, yeah, that's kind of true. That's funny.
Right.
To me, that's what that looked like.
Yep.
Yet there was offense taken.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And again, see, a lot of this too depends on the audience and who's taking the offense, right? But in a broader sense, Michael Jr. is a black comedian. Michael Jr. tells jokes that there are innuendos towards white people and black people. And when you look at his 4,000 people sitting in the audience, there's blacks and whites buckling over laughing. Nobody's offended because they understand the context. They understand this is comedy.
Right.
And I think that we're losing that where if I hear anything, even if it's in a context that is not demeaning, and I take offense of it, then you're wrong, you're guilty, and you need to be canceled or you need to apologize. And man, that's a slippery slope.
And I think on top of that, there is almost a push to say you should never say or do anything that could be offensive to anybody, which means what are you going to say? What are you going to do? Right? Especially if you have a public platform, whether you're a comedian or a preacher or performer or whatever.
Yeah. But never say anything that will never be offensive to anybody. That is becoming so narrow.
That's my point.
What you can say.
You can almost say nothing.
You can almost say nothing. Right. And to me, that's where I'm seeing this sense of intolerance now. Everything's being labeled. That offended me. That offended me. That offended me. That offended me. Well, and again, we're trying to deal with things from a theological standpoint, from a biblical worldview standpoint, and I think we need to step back for a minute and define what do you mean by offend. So, biblically speaking, right, the Christian, when we talk about offending, I'm causing you to sin.
Yeah, you're talking 1 Corinthians.
I'm talking 1 Corinthians, right?
11,
exactly. Yeah. So I don't like what you said. Well, I'm not sinning against you because you don't like what I said. Right, and so I think that's another conversation we need to have. What does it mean to offend somebody?
If I say something that is deemed offensive by culture, the question is, should I not say it? And so the answer to that would be, well, it depends.
It depends,
right? If what you're saying is truth,
right,
then that most likely will offend plenty of people in the culture.
People are offended when I say I believe Jesus Christ is the only way to salvation.
Right.
They are offended by that.
Right.
Am I going to stop proclaiming that? No.
Yeah.
I believe that is the truth of what Scripture teaches.
Yeah. That Jesus Christ is the only way to salvation, period.
Right. And that will offend hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people. So do we stop saying that? Do we back off? No.
So we have this difference between speaking biblical truth, and clearly when we speak biblical truth, it's going to offend, it's going to make people upset, it's going to incite criticism and accusations, and we talked about this last week. Then there are things that aren't necessarily, hey, I'm speaking biblical truth.
Right.
I'm just trying to live in culture, and a bunch of white guys made a rap video. As Christians, knowing that that's going to offend certain people, should we stay away from that kind of stuff? Right? So what's your response to that?
So as Christians, Okay, so now it becomes. I'm thinking about the scripture, and I forget where the reference is, where it talks about to be spoken well of.
Okay.
To be spoken well of by those who are without the household of faith. So there is a principle there, right? A theological principle there that even among those who do not know Christ, I want to be spoken well of. That doesn't mean I go along with everything the culture says and does.
So, for instance, if I know that as a white guy, say me and John, who's also white.
Is John white? John, you white?
And
that explains. See,
Dan Harney, who we had on here a few weeks ago, our worship leader, he's white. Say we make a rap video where we dress up like black hip hop artists. Okay. There may be nothing inherently wrong with that, and most people may look at that and be like, "Oh, that's funny. You guys look ridiculous."
A bunch of white guys.
You guys look ridiculous, right? And you could find the humor in that. But if we do that knowing that there's going to be a certain segment of society that's going to look at that and say, "How sensitive."
Right.
You're propagating racial stereotypes that are hurtful.
Right.
Whether we agree with that or not,
right.
Should we refrain from doing that for that reason?
I would say yes.
Okay.
I would say yes, and here's why. Because what's the cost of that? Mm-hmm. What's the fallout of that? Okay, funny video, YouTube hits, 2,000 hits, whatever. Mm-hmm. What are you giving up? Mm-hmm. By that right to do that, even though your intent is not racial, you're just being silly, right? We joke around all the time, right? There's ways.
I know. I'm very serious about about this.
There's fallout that can come as a result of our freedom. And again, I think it comes back to the theological principle. Where Paul says the greatest command should be your love of your neighbor, right? So if I know it's going to cause that kind of fallout, particularly right now in our culture,
especially right now,
why would I even do that? Mm-hmm. Because anything I have to say about the gospel, it's just you've lost a hearing.
Yeah, that's right.
And to me, it's not worth just having fun to do something that's not ill-motivated, knowing that I'm going to lose a hearing. Yeah. And I think that's the principle where he talks about to have a good testimony of those who are within the household of faith and those who are without the household of faith. Why? Not because my freedom, I don't have freedom to do these things, but I want to have a hearing. Mm-hmm. I want to be able to have people listen when I proclaim Christ. Yeah.
So John scrapped the hip-hop video, the music video.
Well, and here's, so it's interesting though. So that's one side of the coin, right? Let me flip it over to the other side. So you remember the rapper Vanilla Ice?
Oh yeah.
Wow, you got to see these. You got to see these. Ice, baby, right? So let me ask you a question.
Yeah, ice, baby.
So was he being racist or being offensive by becoming a white rapper? A white hip hop rapper?
Yeah, I don't know I don't know enough about hip hop. I'll be honest with you.
Well, you were the one like, yeah, baby, like you know. But you see my point.
I totally get your point.
Do you see my point?
Was he criticized for that because he was white, trying to get into what has traditionally been a black culture,
right,
of music?
He got criticism.
Okay.
Like what is this? White dude wearing chains, trying to put the baseball cap.
Was he like a pioneer of white rappers? Because there's been a few like Eminem's come along.
Right. Like I mean, there's certainly a smaller amount, right? So it's like, but my point is this, and this is where this conversation, is it not okay for a white guy who hears, I'm going back now, Run DMC and these guys
I've
who
heard
did hip
Run
hop,
DMC.
right?
Yeah, oh yeah.
My Adidas, right?
Milli Vanilli. No, I'm kidding.
Is it wrong for a white guy to hear that music and say, I like that genre?
Not at all.
And I want to learn it.
Yeah. And, play. Now, again, genre as opposed to, because you're going to hear some people say, well, that's full of cursing and language and sexual.
But aside from
you're talking the genre of music.
I'm just talking about
the
the genre of music that if there is a predominantly propagated by African Americans, the hip hop culture, as we say. Mm-hmm. Now here, is it okay if there's white people or Spanish people or Indian people who hear that genre of music and say, I like hip hop, and they want to get involved in the music? Does that make them racist? Does that make them, when they start rapping that way, does it, what are you guys trying to do? Mimic us? Are you trying to? I think we got to be careful. We got to be careful.
So on that note, and I'm asking mostly out of ignorance, when white people kind of adopt that style of music and even that style of dress and things like that, does the black community kind of look at them like, what are they doing and why are they trying to?
Some of them do.
Okay.
Some of them do.
All right.
Right? And I guess what I'm advocating is if that goes with that genre of music, they're not doing that to make a racial statement.
They're doing that because they like that.
That's what the hip-hop artist dresses like.
Yeah.
For example, black country music singers.
Sure.
They're on the stage
With a hat and the
with a
Wranglers,
hat and the cowboy boots. The guy's trying to be white. No, that goes with the genre of music. So we got to be careful that we don't take those kind of things and then read into them and say, you're being offensive. And that is, I see so much of that happening in our culture now. Because it is a hot button issue of where we are racially.
Yeah. Well, and there's the whole discussion of how much of what's happening in our culture with regards to whether it's the BLM movement or critical race theory is actually, and we won't get into this today, and I know I'm alluding to this for the past couple of weeks, but we will get into it in more detail, is that creating more division within our communities?
Yes, I think it is.
As opposed to bringing people together.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And now we're going to have to defend that statement.
Absolutely.
We won't do that today because I want to spend some more time unpacking what is going on in our culture with regards to whether it's BLM, critical race theory, stuff that's being talked about as far as curriculum in the schools and talking about race and things like that, stuff that's going to be coming into the church, which we'll get into actually a little bit in a few minutes here. But defending that statement, I think what they're doing is actually creating more division than it is unity. As soon as people say that, all of a sudden it's like, wait, their whole premise is of critical race theory or the BLM movement. It's all about unity, right? That's what they say. It's about equity and equality and a bunch of these buzzwords that get thrown out. And so we will take some time as we head into the future. I know we've touched on it briefly in the past, but I feel that there's so much confusion amongst white people in particular, right? As I represent on this podcast anyway, just the perspective from the white community saying, man, I don't understand. So some of it's just some ignorance around their understanding of things. Sometimes it's like, why do certain people in the black community feel this way and look this way at what white people are doing? Why are they so offended by white people doing this? Whereas white people are like, I'm not trying to be racist. Why are you offended? Right. I think a lot of that's going on in the culture. And I think to some degree we have a whether it's a race issue or whatever, we have a culture of people who are so easily offended by everything.
And that everything is hypersensitive now.
Oh my goodness!
And here's the problem. And we alluded to this, I think, back when we talked about this early on.
We did.
There are true racial issues in our country.
Yep.
I don't
stuff
think
that isn't greatly offensive.
Absolutely, and I don't think anybody would deny that. Well, I guess some probably would deny that. We can just go back to the time of Christ again and see that there were racial issues, the Jews and the Gentiles. So this is
nothing new.
This is nothing new.
The question is,
from that stance.
Is the biggest threat in our culture at large and in the church, racial tension and white supremacy? Is that the biggest issue? Because that's what's being communicated by some in our culture and even in the church. The biggest issue we're going to face in the coming days is the issue of racial reconciliation and white supremacy. Those are the biggest issues.
I think the biggest issue in our world is reconciliation with a holy God.
Yep.
I think that's the way God sees it. Because racial issues, and that's not to dumb down or to minimize that we need to have these hard conversations about race. And see, the minute I start talking this way, I've been in conversations with people, and the minute I talk about the greatest thing is reconciliation to a holy God, see, you don't understand. Time out. Time out.
Yep.
Right?
And that's the pushback, especially as a white, you don't understand. You don't understand.
Right. But yet God in the flesh, through Jesus Christ, walked the earth during a time of tremendous racial what?
Tension.
Tension. And yet he said, I'm headed to a cross because you wouldn't have racial tension if you did not have the fallenness and the depravity of man.
Yeah.
And then we can't get that.
His parable of the Good Samaritan.
Yeah.
is just powerful when
Right.
you really understand what was going on racially there, and the people that would have heard it would have been actually offended.
Incensed by what he said, right? So it is a real issue, and we need to talk about it.
Yeah.
But my thing is, it's like the real answer. And again, this is from a biblical perspective. You know, if you're watching this podcast for the first time and you're like, oh, you're not. From a biblical perspective, the gospel is getting shrouded in all of this as the ultimate solution, as opposed to some of the things proposed in critical race theory.
So, on that note, I wanted to delve into maybe a couple weeks of it's not necessarily one topic. It's going to lead us in a number of different topics. And what it'll do is it'll kind of hit the surface of these topics that we can then later go back around and hit in detail. Mm-hmm. Okay? So we want to talk to the average person sitting, in the seat at church that is trying to love God, trying to serve God, trying to be faithful to God, trying to grow in their walk with God, trying to be a member of the community where you're serving one another and you're loving one another and you're pointing people to Christ. Okay, so this is just the average person in church. Okay, there's so many different kinds of churches in the United States, different denominations, different flavors of churches, different styles of worship, different styles of preaching and teaching. Right. There's so much content out there online with regards to preaching and podcasts and music and then reading with books and things like that. We live in a culture and a time period where there is so much at the tip of your fingers with regards to content that you can consume, and you're going to hear all kinds of different things.
Absolutely.
Not just at your church that you're at, but online and everywhere else. You're just going to be inundated with so many different statements and teachings and doctrines that I think sometimes people get overloaded with. How do I know what's good and what's bad? They say, eat the cherry but spit out the seed type thing. Mm-hmm. Like, how do I even know what the seeds are, and how do I know what to take in and what to spit out? We just subscribed here at Faith Church to a resource called Right Now Media, which is a digital library of thousands of teaching videos and animated series for kids and stuff like that. It's a tremendous, and it's all Christian based. All the intention is for it to be biblically based teaching and training, help from everything from Bible studies to how to deal with emotional issues to financial issues to kids material, right? And this is just one example. And so we pay the subscription for it, and then we allow our church people to sign up, and they can access it for free. They go online, they can create their account. If you're listening to this podcast right now and you would like access to it, you can go right to faithchurch.com, click on the Right Now Media link, and you can have a free subscription yourself and have access to over 20,000 of these videos, okay? My point is this, and I would encourage you to do it. Access it. There's some tremendous Bible teachers on there, some tremendous resources. However, and I have to tell this to our people, not everything on there has teaching that we would fully endorse.
Sure.
And so you have to listen critically.
Right.
You have to listen and say, okay, does this sound right? Or does this sound more like what I'm hearing from the culture? Mm-hmm. And so, because I went through a couple of the things in there, and I listened to a couple of the videos, and realized, okay, this isn't something that we at Faith Church would endorse with regards, and I'm not saying it's necessarily heresy, for instance, but it's not what we would teach. And so my point is this: we are inundated, and Christians are inundated with so much content. Mm-hmm. I think it can get confusing as to what is good and what I should receive and what I should reject. Okay, and so I'm kind of calling these segments. How did I phrase this? How did I phrase this on the title of the video of our podcast? I just set up things you hear in church, or how you respond.
How should you respond if you hear this in church?
Okay, yeah. So when you hear this in church.
In church.
Yeah.
Okay. Among.
Yeah. In church, or I would even expand that to online, on my Right Now Media subscription or whatever. Okay. How should you respond? And so I picked just a couple of statements that I've heard in culture that when you hear this in your church, how should we respond? So I want to take maybe a couple weeks, maybe 3 weeks, and go through some of these because I want it to be a real practical help to everybody listening to say, hey, yeah, I've heard that before.
Right.
What should my response be?
Right.
So when you hear this, how should you respond? So we want to give some practical help here. So, and the first one goes off of what we were kind of just talking about with race. And again, this is a surface level discussion.
Yep.
We will later come back
and go deeper.
into it. Okay?
Yeah.
So when you are watching online, or when your pastor gets up and says, "Hey, we're going to have a series or a class on social justice and racial reconciliation. We want you to be a part of it." How should we respond?
I'm busy that night. Okay, so how should we respond as far as whether you participate in that?
I'm just saying, how should you respond? What should you do? What do you? The average person, they're sitting in their church like, yeah, my pastor just said we're going to have a seminar next weekend on social justice and racial reconciliation. What would you advise that? So someone comes to you and says, I've heard this, Pastor Ron, what should I do?
Yeah, so I'll give you off the top of my tongue answer, right? And we'll come back around and go deeper.
Yep,
okay.
Yep.
So if I'm sitting in a church and I hear my pastor say that, because everybody's approaching it from a different standpoint, okay?
Yep.
Let me first use me as an example. If the pastor said they were going to do that, my first response is, because I've already done this at churches, I'm going to go and see what you have to say.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. No, that's good. Yeah. Yeah. Go talk to the pastor and say, hey, what are we doing?
What exactly is this about?
Okay.
Okay. Yep. Boom, boom, boom. We're gonna, and I feel our society, we need racial reconciliation. Okay.
Because immediately you're going to start hearing, okay, I've heard some of this in culture.
Absolutely.
I'm hearing this in the church. I'm unsure.
Yep.
So go to your pastor and say, hey, I'm just
have a sit down.
I've got a couple of red flags.
Absolutely. You cannot and this is what's happening in our culture. You cannot respond emotionally just based off of a title.
Because what some people do, there it is. They're just going to flat out teach, liberal, progressive, theology, and we're going to, I'm done. I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Right.
You can't do that because now you are making a judgment call on that person, and you haven't. All you heard was a title. Hey, Wednesday night, boom, boom, boom. I'm going to go to, hey, Pastor, could we catch coffee? Hey, listen, what's your slant on this? Where are you coming from? So that's the very first thing you should do, right?
Yep.
Now, again.
And if he's bringing in an organization to talk about it, if he's bringing in a curriculum,
absolutely,
you can look at that and you can examine it and continue to ask questions.
Yep. See, here's one of the things that we should not do, because I'm trying to keep it practical right now.
Yep.
Real practical. I hear Christians responding, like you said, with that initial, see that, and they just shun it off. Okay. But yet when I look at the New Testament, here I see the Apostle Paul in the marketplace, engaging and reasoning with people. Where are we ever going to get the opportunity to do that if we just have an emotional response and refuse to engage in conversation with these things?
And by the way, you actually can speak from firsthand experience because you've actually gone to churches where they've asked you to come in and talk about racial reconciliation.
Absolutely, right? And so when I came in and spoke, I'm coming in, I trust, with a gospel-centered presentation while not trying to dumb down what's going on in our society. So we can't hear these buzzwords and assume, right? A lot of the things that we would say are counterintuitive to Scripture, that's what that thing must be about. Don't do that. Go find out. But I would say first, go talk to the pastor, see where they're coming from, and then express your concerns about that. Now, does that mean he's going to say, okay, you know what, I'm not going to do that? He may not even say, well, I think it's important that the people hear this. I would encourage you, now actually go.
Yeah.
And sit in and hear and take notes, right? And engage.
Listen critically.
Listen critically and hear what they are saying. So that's how I would handle that.
Yeah. Now, I think that's wise counsel, because when someone talks racial reconciliation, even when they use the term social justice, you can't just assume that they are talking about some sort of Marxist cultural ideology.
Exactly. Absolutely.
They might be.
They might be.
That could be that. You know, this kind of cultural Marxism coming in under the guise of spiritual reconciliation type language.
Absolutely.
Which quite frankly, is happening in the church.
That is happening. That is happening.
Okay.
I agree.
But not everyone who uses, that's what's difficult about
the terminology.
These buzzwords and this terminology is they're packed with so much potential tension that people automatically either recoil or automatically are, that sounds so good. Mm-hmm. So on the other side of it, if someone's like, hey, that sounds, I got a couple of red flags. On the other side of it, you've got people who are like, that just sounds so wonderful. Yeah. Justice and reconciliation, like that's what the Bible talks about that. Right. Yeah, we should
That's what the cross is about. Yeah, reconciliation,
right? And so on the other side of that coin, you have people that have no critical viewpoint at all that just sounds so great.
Absolutely.
And after all, I just love everybody. Yep. And I want to be, reconciled to everybody and everybody of color or ethnic origin. Just bring it on and let's just go dive right in. Yeah. And so the other danger is to just fully accept everything because it sounds so good.
Yep, absolutely.
And so there's kind of two sides of that coin, and so it's not necessarily going to be evil, but it's not necessarily maybe all good either.
That's right.
I think at the end of the day, use discernment, and man, you've really got to do some digging on your own.
Well, and that's what I was kind of thinking, and here's what my concern is. Mm-hmm. For God's people, right? As you know, we have to be engaged in the culture. We're not to be in this holy bubble, right? Christ prayed, keep them. Well, I'm not praying that you take them out of the world. Mm-hmm. And yes, he was praying for those disciples during that time, but I think by extension, it applies to us too. Yeah. Okay? Keep them while they're in the world. But then he says that very important phrase, sanctify them in your truth. Mm-hmm. My concern, Doug, and I don't know, and again, I'm just speaking in a general sense, but as I speak with Christians, that it seems to me that the average Christian, I'm going to say the average pew goer, cannot critically, and I'm going to add another word, and theologically think through these issues.
Okay.
We have to have a large enough theological filter to pour this stuff through. Okay? How do you develop that? Your study of God's Word. Knowing how to study God's Word, knowing how to think theologically, knowing how to do a good hermeneutic based on what book you're in to get what is God saying here. If we're not starting with that, our emotions, the culture, whatever, is going to just kind of lean you one way or the other. Yep. And so I think, and that's why I say, go to something like that and listen, but don't listen with your emotion.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Listen
most
theologically.
And especially with a topic like this, most people will begin to just listen with emotion.
Absolutely, right? And so I think, as if you're watching this podcast and you're a believer, man, I would challenge you. What is your time in the Word like? I'm not just talking about reading through and checking the box at the back of the Bible that I read through the Bible.
Study the Word.
That's great. Are you studying it? Yeah. Are you looking at movements of Scripture and how God is working theologically in the lives of people? Because if you don't have that as a foundation and we're trying to respond in a Christian way,
and if you're like, well, I don't have training, invest in some resources then that will help you. Invest in some books and some whether it's a commentary or whatever. And if you don't have the money to do that, then go online and listen to qualified, trained men who handle the Word, who have a history of handling the Word of God in a honorable and accurate way.
Absolutely.
And listen to them talk and listen to them preach and get a hold of. That's one of the reasons why we do this podcast, right? Yep. We want to give people in the church extra training, right, to be able to deal with things in culture that will come across their path from a biblical perspective. Yep. So things like this podcast and other podcasts, invest time into that.
And to your point, you said there's tons and tons of stuff out there in the culture coming at us, right? there are so many resources out there for biblical training.
There is.
That are free.
That are free, yeah.
That's one of the positive things I will say about social media and YouTube and the internet.
Yep.
Biblicaltraining.org is a free website.
Yeah.
And there's guys on there like Bill Mounts and all these guys that we had to read their textbooks.
Yeah, that wrote these commentaries.
And they're giving free classes.
Yeah,
so
it's awesome.
Hillsdale College gives free online classes, right? Yeah. And again, not that I would agree with everything they say, but the point is, we got to stop making excuses. We got to stop making excuses. I don't know enough.
No, because that is not an excuse.
That's not an excuse.
It's at the tip of your
2021.
fingers. So these aren't going anywhere. Like I say this to my teenage boys and kids, even in our church here. I said, we can get on you guys for being on your phones too much, screen time, blah blah blah. And there's some concerns there that you need to be aware of, but they're not going anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you can access a lot of dangerous stuff here, but you can also leverage it for a lot of really, really good.
You can.
And
you can
training and content that can help. And listen, I when I was a youth pastor, I worked doing janitorial here at the church in the mornings.
Yeah.
And so I cleaned toilets for like 4 or 5 years for a couple hours every morning. And what I did during those years, I started listening to podcasts and preaching and teaching, and I just consumed. So 2 hours every morning, I was just listening to preaching and teaching from different seminary professors and stuff like that. And the amount of growth that I experienced in those years was amazing. And I was currently going to seminary at the time too, but I just experienced so much growth, and I learned so much. And again, I didn't agree with everything I heard. In fact, there were some things I had to listen to 3, 4, 5, a dozen times just to kind of think through it and process it and reference other things with regards to what they were saying and kind of work through my own kind of positions on things. And what a blessing that was that God led me into that time period where he says, I'm going to force you to spend 2 hours every day just listening and growing and learning. And it changed my life.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely.
So leverage your time in the car. You got to commute in the morning and coming back, you could listen to, sports radio, you could listen to, music, and that can be fine, but get audiobooks.
Yeah.
Right?
Another great resource. Right. Absolutely.
So,
I mean, in this age, there is no reason why we can't do that. Yeah. And so it's fundamental that we do that because as we're dealing with things, whether it's critical race theory, racial reconciliation, social justice, whatever, transgender movement, sex revolution going on, all these things going on, it just seems like a lot of us are responding with our emotion, and we can't tie down these things to a theological position because we don't even have that.
Yeah. And as much as we can discuss things here, even here on this format, we're limited.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We're not going to answer all of your questions, and you're not going to walk away from a podcast saying, okay, I totally and completely understand, the ins and outs of social justice movement, critical race theory, and, what racial reconciliation is all about. We can help get you guided and started and along the way and
challenge your thinking toward it,
and give you maybe a solid foundation. But you've got to really take the
absolutely.
So
absolutely
good point there. I'm sorry. I got a notice on this is totally unrelated, but I got a notice on my news app that says Hawaii is under a threat of tsunamis after a huge earthquake off New Zealand.
Oh wow, really?
And so I have a sister and her family that live in Hawaii. So I texted her. I said, "Are you guys?"
Yeah.
And she just texted and said they just lifted the watch. So
oh, good.
They look like they're okay. Amen. There. So anyway, here you go. I hear this a lot, John. I don't have my computer out today. How long have we gone into the podcast? How long have we? I lose track of time.
Well, it's hard to say because you put it live on OBS before.
If you go to the actual Facebook or YouTube, it tells you how long we've been streaming.
About 45.
Okay. All right, we'll go another 5-10 minutes here. You're sitting in church, or you're reading a book, or you're listening to a podcast, and the speaker says, God wants you to recognize your full potential.
Yeah, what verse is that?
You hear a lot of you recognizing your potential talk in evangelicalism today.
Absolutely.
Good, bad. Should we accept that? Should we pursue that? What do you think?
No, I would ask him what chapter and verse is he in, because again, this is part of the progressive Christianity that's starting to seep its way in.
Okay.
So, and again, like you said, we're just kind of flying over some of these topics. We definitely got to come back and go deeper on this one. So, one of the proponents of progressive Christianity said this, and I'm going to paraphrase because I'll probably misquote. I don't have his quote right in front of me, but when we go deeper, I'll have it in front of me. Mm-hmm. In our churches, we need to stop preaching about man's problem as being a sin issue and start preaching how Jesus Christ will enable them to be what God has designed them to be. Almost saying the same thing you just said, right? That the totality of Christianity and God and Jesus and the atonement and all of that is for you to experience your potential. Mm-hmm. With God's help, for you to be able to do those things that God's created you to do. Sounds very encouraging, very motivating.
Yeah, it does.
Right? But when you tie it to a theological or put it through a theological grid, just off the top of my head, I hear Paul saying, the life that I now live, I live under Christ. That all that I do, it's for His glory. Like Christ didn't die so I would be a better teacher, right? So I would be a better counselor, right? Can I be a better teacher and a better counselor by applying biblical principles in my life? Sure, sure, right? But that statement there, read it one more time.
God wants you to realize your full potential.
Yeah. That, to me, reeks of narcissism.
Okay, so let me give you an example. No. God comes to Gideon, right? Says, Gideon, I want you to save Israel. And Gideon says, I'm actually preaching this text Sunday, so I've gone through it. Gideon says, God, I'm the least of my clan. My clan's the least in Manasseh. I'm the least tribe. I'm a nobody from nowhere.
Right.
Who am I? And look what God says to them. Says to him, and he calls him a mighty man of valor. He saw what was in Gideon. What Gideon couldn't see was what was in himself. Why would he call him a mighty man of valor? And then God says, go in this might of yours. And so God saw might in Gideon that Gideon couldn't see in himself. Therefore, Gideon had this potential that God saw in him that Gideon couldn't see in himself.
Right. That'll preach.
That'll
preach right there.
Yes,
brother.
It will.
That'll preach.
Yes.
Only problem is Gideon only accomplished anything he accomplished because of God.
Well, then why would God tell him he's so mighty and powerful?
You're going to unpack that on Sunday.
That's true, I am.
So again, it goes back to what I said before about a proper hermeneutic.
Yep.
Right? Mm-hmm. We can go into all these texts. We can pick up the David and Goliath text and say, no matter how small you are, no matter how big the giant is, you got those stones in you. What is it that you have in you? We can switch all of that to take the focus off of God and His sovereignty in my life to what I can do by adding God to my life.
Yeah. So there's different types of preaching that we can do. One is called eisegesis, which you want to stay away from.
Right.
That's where you read into the text whatever you want. There's what's called exegesis, which is what you want to do. You just want to exegete. You want to pull out of the text what's in there.
Yeah.
And just communicate what the text is intended to say.
Yeah.
It's kind of a new method that's come along that they've identified as narcigesis. So someone that's narcissistic is consumed with self, right? And so narcigesis, what it does is it reads me and you into the text, and we become the central characters in every single one of the texts.
Absolutely.
So that the text is primarily about us and our potential and our issues, and it becomes about Jesus doing all of these things so that we can realize our true potential. So narcissistic preaching feels so great.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And people love it.
Sure. Absolutely.
And there certainly are some texts in Scripture that speak to our needs, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
And speak to our weaknesses and our struggles. But once you start to identify preaching, in particular teaching, that you're hearing from your church or online or on a podcast or in a book, that seems to put people, mankind, at the center of every text, I would say throw up some red flags.
Big flags, right. Right.
Because to your point, Jesus didn't die so that you could become a better version of yourself.
Absolutely.
Right.
Right.
And maybe it's not a full-blown wealth, health, prosperity gospel that Jesus died so that you could be wealthy and not live in poverty. But it's very close, right?
Yeah.
So rather than saying, well, the Bible is not about you having money, but the Bible is about you reaching your full potential and you accomplishing these great things, which ultimately lead to success, right?
But here's the problem with that thinking. Mm-hmm. If that's what it's about, if we're the central character, you don't need Jesus for that.
Nope.
Do you know how many people have reached full potential, are CEOs of companies, writing
without
books
Jesus,
without Christ?
Yeah.
They're atheists.
Mm-hmm. Now, what some people do is say, well, okay, so to set that aside, he wants you to realize your full potential to do ministry and to help people and you know.
It still puts the onus on you, right? And yet when I read Paul, we're nothing but a slave, right? The life that I now live, I live unto Christ. For me to live is Christ. And if I die, it's my gain. Because, I mean, it's so Christ-centered.
Paul says, I came to you in weakness and trembling and much fear.
Right. So
no one looked at Paul when he came and says, man, that guy's got it.
Look at the potential of this guy, right? And again, it's just a wrong view, and we'll come back to this. It's a wrong view, really, of what the gospel was all about.
Yeah. Yep. So if you're questioning, wondering, well, how do you deal with the Gideon passage that you just referenced? We'll talk about that on Sunday.
Unpack that on Sunday, right?
Come out on Sunday or tune in.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll talk about, there's a hint. I'll give you a hint. Gideon's might was tied directly to the presence of God.
Absolutely.
Because God says, Gideon, I am with you.
I am with you.
Based on that.
You remove God.
Now go.
Yeah. Right?
Yep. So, all right, we'll continue next week with a couple more of these questions.
Yeah.
So
these are going to make good individual podcasts.
At some point, yeah. After a couple weeks, we'll wrap it around and say, okay, let's unpack the social justice and racial reconciliation thing, which you can say, oh, yeah, we've kind of done that earlier this past summer and stuff like that. But like I said before, that's a topic I think that continues to have new questions come up.
Yeah.
And listen, you and I are both growing in our study of these topics as well. So we're going to come back and say, hey, listen, I've been doing some reading of my own, been doing some study of my own. Here's some things I want to convey as a result of that. And hopefully you guys can all grow along with us.
Absolutely.
Okay?
Yep.
All right, we will see you next week.
It's next week the 25th? Is that 25th?
That is the 25th episode.
All right, next week is the 25th. Make sure you tune in because Doug is going to have debuting our B&W mugs that he promised episode 3. And I am so excited that we made it to episode 25 next week if the Lord tarries for those mugs. And you won't see this ugly can anymore.
Oh, my bad. You were muted on that one. Sorry about that.
You know what? See, this is the problem with our society, right?
Yeah, I'm not the producer. Yeah, you've been canceled.
I've been canceled.
You've been canceled. All right, we'll see you guys next week.
Oh, man.